The Wild West Saloon wasn't the glamorous stage Hollywood sold you. Think drifter pushing through swinging doors, piano cutting off mid-note, every pair of eyes bracing for a fight. On screen, these joints became arenas for fearless gunslingers and flashy duels. But that version? Too clean. The real saloon was smoke, rot, and crooked deals waiting to bleed you dry. Stick with this story to the end, because the last reveal will flip how you picture the West forever. Inside the saloon, where the West got ugly, Hollywood sold us a lie. The saloon wasn't some polished hall where legends strolled through batwing doors to claim their destiny. The truth? It was stranger, dirtier, and a whole lot meaner. Step into one of the first saloons, and the air hits you before your eyes can even adjust. A stench thick enough to coat your throat, rotting beer soured in open barrels, whiskey so harsh it seared instead of soothed, and the sweat of men who hadn't touched water since their last cattle drive or shift in the mines. Add in tobacco smoke curling up toward low rafters, and the room itself felt like it was daring you to breathe. Forget the grand halls were shown on screen. The earliest saloons weren't even buildings. They were patched tents of canvas, or sod lean-tos slapped together overnight. They leaked in the rain, shuddered in the wind, and stood for one reason only: to sell liquor fast to men too desperate to care. But as towns grew, so did the facades. Wood replaced canvas, and owners got clever. False fronts towered above narrow shacks, fooling outsiders into thinking they were walking into something more than a wooden box. Inside, thin walls that let you hear coyotes cry through the night. Take the Carissa Saloon in South Pass City, around 1890. Out front, its tall face looked like pride. Around back, it was nothing but warped logs driven into a hillside. Floors soaked in years of spilled drink, plaster peeling beneath paint meant to hide the rot. Only in boomtowns like Deadwood or Tombstone did saloons wear a mask of luxury. Oak bars, patterned wallpaper, chandeliers. But those details were just window dressing. Underneath, the same stink, the same desperation, never left. Even the bat-wing doors had a purpose, and it wasn't glamour. They hung low to keep dust from choking the room. More often, they swung open to let manure and grit inside. And once you crossed that threshold, the assault didn't stop. Sawdust crunched under boots, laid down to soak up spit, foam, and worse. The music wasn't music at all. It was coughing, hacking, the scrape of chairs, and the crack of glasses. Behind the bar, scarred and sticky counters were wiped with rags as filthy as the hands that dragged them. This was the saloon stripped bare, not a stage for heroes, but a warning. A place where thirst mattered more than comfort, where survival sat closer to the grave than the poker table. And yet the most dangerous thing inside wasn't a knife or a gunfight. It was the sickness, waiting in every glass, in every breath you took. The saloon's deadliest secret: a hotbed for sickness. What killed more men in the Wild West than gunfights or duels? Disease. Step inside a saloon, and you were stepping into a breeding ground where one shared glass could cut your odds of survival faster than a six-shooter. The filth started underfoot. Sawdust spread across the floors wasn't for cleanliness. It was to soak up spit, vomit, and worse. Every step stirred germs waiting for the next body to collapse. Packed shoulder to shoulder, drinkers swapped more than whiskey. They shared coughs and sneezes in a fog of tobacco smoke that trapped everything inside. Clean water was a luxury. Bathing meant hauling muddy creek water, heating it slowly, and letting the family take turns in the same tub. By the time the youngest got their turn, the water was cloudy and cold, but it was still reused the next morning. That same filth walked straight back into the saloon, clinging to skin, clothes, and boots. Hygiene offered no protection for your teeth either. With no brushes or paste, men scraped at rotting enamel with knives. When pain became unbearable, the barber doubled as a dentist, yanking teeth with pliers and dousing the wound in whiskey. Infections spread fast, blood poisoning was common, and the misery followed them back to the bar. Outside, things weren't better. Frontier towns had no sewage system, just waste dumped in the street with butcher scraps and dead animals left to rot. Wind carried the filth back inside. Flies and roaches swarmed from the piles to land on bar tops and glasses, while lice and bedbugs crawled across unwashed scalps and infested straw mattresses upstairs. In that hubbub of neglect, epidemics thrived. Cholera was the most feared, sweeping through saloons when just one tainted dipper passed from hand to hand. Tuberculosis stalked silently. Called the White Plague, it spread with every cough in those smoke-filled rooms, killing 1 in 7 on the frontier. Smallpox brought rashes and scars, flaring whenever vaccination lagged. and in the 1830s, it nearly wiped out the Mandan tribe. Pneumonia and dysentery struck constantly, carried by drafty rooms, spoiled food, and fly-specked mugs. Step through those swinging doors, and the deadliest weapon waiting for you wasn't the gun on a stranger's hip. It was the drink in your hand. But worse still, that drink wasn't just filthy. It was often poison, designed to burn your throat, cloud your mind, and sometimes kill you before dawn. The whiskey was toxin, deadlier than a bullet. What if the real killer in a Wild West saloon wasn't the man with a pistol, but the glass in your hand? One drink could leave you blind, crippled, or coughing up your last breath before dawn. The whiskey wasn't fine bourbon aged in oak. It was rot gut, a crude mix cooked up fast from spoiled corn mash or grain scraps. Cowboys called it coffin varnish, tarantula juice, or 40 rod because it could drop a man flat before he staggered out the door. Smooth liquor was rare and expensive, so most bars served this toxic imitation. To fake the look of real whiskey, barkeeps scorched sugar black for color, dropped chewing tobacco into the barrel for bite, and cut it with molasses or honey to stretch the batch. But the real danger came from harsher tricks. Turpentine gave it a sharp kick, creosote darkened the flavor, and even sulfuric acid was added to burn the throat. Some tales spoke of cayenne pepper, glycerin, or worse, strychnine flakes and rattlesnake heads tossed in for effect. Out here, there were no inspectors and no laws. The results were devastating. That first sip might go down hot but tolerable, only to hit later with cramps, vomiting, or blinding headaches. Many woke with damaged eyesight or trembling hands that never steadied again. Others didn't wake at all. One bad batch could sweep through a whole saloon, leaving men doubled over in the sawdust while the barkeep poured the next round. Beer didn't spare you either. Hauled warm across rough trails, it was flat and sour before it ever hit a glass. To make it more effective, saloon owners laced it with narcotics like opium, leaving patrons dazed and easy to exploit. Prices varied wildly, just a nickel in a dusty camp, but as high as half a dollar in remote mining towns, the equivalent of $50 today. Drinking culture only made things worse. Shots weren't sipped, they were slammed. Newcomers were often forced to down huge gulps of 100-proof rot gut under threat of humiliation or worse. Chugging was proof of toughness, but survival was never guaranteed. Some joints tried novelty drinks like cactus wine spiked with peyote or rough berry mixes, but most men kept chasing the same harsh whiskey, round after round. It dulled pain, it blurred hardship, but it also lit short fuses. Once the liquor burned through, words turned sharp, hands went for guns, and the saloon's next eruption began. Because when the bottle was empty, the violence started. And the truth about saloon fights was far darker than Hollywood ever dared show. If peeling back these ugly truths shocks you already, hit the like button. It helps more people uncover just how dark the Wild West really was. Where vice met violence, the fights you didn't see in movies. Step into a frontier saloon, and you might expect the kind of brawls Hollywood built its legends on. Wild, chair-smashing melees where everyone walked away laughing. But the truth was darker, quieter, and far more dangerous. One wrong look across a card table or a drunken shove at the bar could flip the room from noisy laughter to sudden silence, broken only by the sound of a bottle shattering and a man hitting the floor. Fights didn't spiral into theatrical chaos. They ended fast. A blade slipped between ribs or a jagged glass cut deep, leaving the unlucky bleeding out against the wall while the rest of the crowd stepped over him and ordered another drink. The barkeep kept pouring, maybe muttering about cleanup, but never calling for help. Out here, survival was your own problem. Guns, though feared, were rarely part of these scraps. Revolvers misfired, jammed, or shot wide in tight quarters, and no one wanted a massacre every Saturday night. That's why many towns enforced strict no-gun rules. Dodge City fined offenders, and Tombstone's ordinance against carrying weapons triggered the infamous Earp-Clanton feud. Inside the saloon, men often checked their pistols at the door, which meant when tempers flared, fists, knives, and bottles settled scores instead of bullets. With weapons benched, the real tension shifted to the gaming tables. Gambling wasn't just a distraction, it was the saloon's heartbeat. While poker would later dominate Western myths, faro was king. Its fast pace and better odds pulled miners, drifters, and travelers into the action, stacking chips on 13 cards while the banker flipped from the deck. For every honest dealer who built a reputation for fair play, there were sharper men with rigged boxes and marked decks who bled fortunes dry before vanishing at dawn. But the danger wasn't only at faro. Dice games rattled in corners, three-card Monte fleeced the naive, and billiards tables drew wagers that sparked their own disputes. Even darts, horseshoes, or a rowdy piano tune could tilt a night from laughter into violence. The saloon was an engine of constant risk, every game and every drink a chance to lose more than money. And when losses stacked high or pride cracked under the weight of insults, the outcome was rarely a slapstick bar fight. It was sudden, brutal, and personal. One second the room roared with laughter, the next it went cold as a man collapsed in the sawdust. Entertainment was only half the story. The saloon's other half was blood. But the most dangerous weapon in a saloon wasn't the knife or the fist. It was the smile of a woman who could strip a man of everything without ever drawing blood. The saloon girl's hidden hustle. Frontier saloons hid their deadliest trick in plain sight: the women. Their smiles drew men closer, but every laugh and every touch was bait, feeding a machine designed to strip pockets, cloud judgment, and sometimes leave a customer with more than an empty wallet. What looked like harmless fun was the first move in a game no man truly controlled. These women weren't prostitutes, at least not in the main room. They were saloon girls, entertainers trained to pull men toward the bar. A wink, a quick step across the scarred floor, or a light hand on the arm, and suddenly another round was ordered. The whiskey they drank wasn't whiskey at all, usually watered tea or syrup disguised with a drop of bitters. The cowboy thought he was treating her, but all she took was her cut, clear-headed and ready for the next mark. It worked because the money was steady. Base pay might run $10 a week, good money for a frontier woman, and the real profit came from commissions. A girl pocketed 15 cents for every 25-cent pour, a fortune once the drinks piled up. Prices shifted with the boomtown, 10 cents in some backwater joint, 75 in Tombstone at the height of the silver fever. But the hustle stayed the same. The work carried risks. Leers, insults, and the constant press of hands meant a girl had to hold her ground. But inside the saloon, she wasn't defenseless. Men who roughed up a girl often found themselves frozen out, their money no good, or worse, facing fists, knives, or bullets from regulars who saw the women as part of the fragile piece that kept the room alive. They weren't ornaments. They were the glue that held the night together. Still, critics called it corruption. Temperance crusaders painted them as bait for men too weak to say no, claiming every smile was part of the trap. And maybe it was. Behind the charm, saloon owners built empires on their backs, cheap liquor marked up, coins funneled through the girls, and a night's laughter paid for in wages that rarely matched the profit they generated. Flirtation wasn't just a game, it was a business. And behind every glass, lifted in a toast, was a reminder. In the saloon, nothing was what it seemed. And that deception only grew deeper because behind the swinging doors existed rules so strict that one wrong step could cost you your dignity or your life. Locked doors and silent rules. The Wild West saloons looked like open doors to anyone with coins to spend, but appearances lied. Under the clatter of glasses and laughter, invisible lines divided who was welcome and who would be humiliated, beaten, or thrown into the street for crossing them. Behind every drink was an unspoken rule, and breaking it could turn a night of escape into a brutal lesson. The first boundary was women. Respectable wives and mothers avoided saloons entirely. To step inside was to invite scandal, the same stigma reserved for prostitutes working in the shadows. Even when World War I began loosening rules, the fear of whispers and disgrace kept good women away. Saloon girls and entertainers worked openly, but every other woman risked her reputation the moment she crossed the threshold. Race carved even deeper divides. Native Americans, Chinese laborers, and black cowboys, who made up nearly a quarter of the Longhorn crews, were almost always turned away from white-owned saloons. They built their own places instead. Like Virginia City's Boston Saloon, opened in 1864 by William Brown, it became a hub for black patrons until it closed in 1875, leaving behind fine china and wine bottles uncovered decades later, evidence of a thriving world created in the shadow of exclusion. In some border towns, Mexican and white patrons drank side by side, but farther north, segregation held firm. Even soldiers faced hostility. U.S. Army troops, fresh from forts or patrols, were despised as enforcers of rules in a place built on defiance. Some blamed them for spreading disease. Others just didn't want uniformed men in their free-for-all. Most soldiers learned to keep to the corners, nursing their beer under cold stares. Inside those guarded walls, the code was just as strict. Privacy came first. Ask the wrong question, and you might get a fist in the mouth. Etiquette mattered too. Refuse to buy a round, and you risk the entire room turning on you. The saloon looked like a place of escape, but it was bound by unspoken laws: who belonged, who didn't, and how quickly a single misstep could bring violence crashing down. But saloons weren't just enforcing social codes, they were quietly running entire towns, shaping law and order in ways that turned justice into a game. If this hidden side of saloons shocked you, share it with a friend. Let them see how these places quietly ruled entire towns. Saloons, the town's shadow government. Behind the swinging doors, saloons were never just about whiskey and cards. They carried secrets that shaped entire towns, where law, faith, and politics collided in ways that often ended in violence. Step inside, and you weren't only walking into a bar, you were walking into the town's nerve center, a place where salvation and sin sat shoulder to shoulder. In a raw frontier camp, the first building to rise wasn't a church or a school. It was almost always a saloon. Inside those canvas tents or plank-walled shacks, miners traded gold dust for beans, cowboys swapped gossip about rustlers, and drifters picked up rumors of fresh strikes. It worked like a living newspaper, only louder and more dangerous. But ironically, when the town preacher had no pulpit, he went to the saloon. The barkeep would shove the tables aside, sweep the floor, and let hymns rise in the same air that reeked of last night's whiskey. Some saloons blurred the line even further. Judge Roy Bean's Jersey Lily in Langtree, Texas, served as a saloon, courtroom, and jail. He sentenced men over whiskey chasers, with hungover cowboys acting as jury, handing out justice and fines as if it were all part of the entertainment. In Downeyville, California, a saloon doubled as the sheriff's office, where disputes got settled under the haze of cigar smoke. But booze fueled politics, too. Elections turned into spectacles of free liquor, where candidates bought loyalty one glass at a time. Votes were cast by men too drunk to stand straight, and office often went not to the best man, but to the one with the deepest keg. Behind the laughter, the hymns, and the whiskey, saloons held a darker truth. They weren't only watering holes, they were the engines that quietly ran the West. Yet even these shadow governments bowed to a different kind of ruler, women whose power was cloaked in velvet, diamonds, and a grip that could be as deadly as any outlaw's gun. Madames. Power, greed, and a deadly grip. Toxic liquor and disease were only part of saloon life's dangers. Behind the upstairs curtains sat women who wielded more power than most men in town, uncrowned queens who built empires from vice. These were the madames, figures Hollywood rarely tells the full truth about, yet they shaped a hidden economy as ruthless as it was profitable. With few respectable jobs available, running a brothel became one of the only paths to wealth and independence. Madames flipped stigma into power, buying property, investing in ranches, and lending money at crushing rates. Their establishments often looked cleaner and more refined than the saloons below, but the glitter was a mask. Behind the velvet curtain was a system just as dirty and dangerous. Luxury was part of the strategy. Madames draped themselves in silks and diamonds, selling an image of sophistication that lured customers into believing they were stepping into high-class society. Yet for the women under them, life was little more than survival. Profits rarely reached the workers, with room, board, and endless debts swallowing every cent. Even gambling and liquor sales flowed back into the madame's pocket, with drinks often marked up by 60% or watered down with the same toxic tricks that plagued saloons across the frontier. And the exploitation ran deeper still. Some madames encouraged theft from drunk or unconscious patrons, turning every night into a hunt for profit by any means. Their outward gestures of charity, donating blankets, books, or clothing, helped protect reputations, but they couldn't erase the fear they inspired. The balance of glamour and brutality made their power absolute, yet it was always shadowed by a cost. Many had started as prostitutes themselves, scarred by the same dangers they later oversaw. Addiction, violence, and despair were constant companions. Madams built empires on exploitation, wealth carved from desperation, and legacies stained with vice. The question that lingers is whether they should be remembered as symbols of resilience in a brutal world, or as predators who turned misery into fortune. And yet, even their ruthless grip was only one layer of the darkness. Because behind the laughter, the whiskey, and the glittering rooms, some saloons didn't just take a man's money, they swallowed him whole. The saloon trap, where men vanished without a trace. Not every man who walked through a saloon's doors walked back out. Some vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unpaid bar tabs, empty saddles, and families who never saw them again. These weren't ghost stories told by drunks around a fire. Bones, records, and whispers proved the danger was real. And once you know how these disappearances happened, you'll never see a saloon the same way again. not every visitor left a saloon alive. Beneath the laughter and clinking glasses, these establishments were notorious for theft, violence, and sudden death. Fights fueled by liquor often ended in stabbings or gunfire, and with little real law enforcement, many of these crimes simply vanished into silence. Disappearances were frequent. Men carrying gold, cash, or trade goods could enter and never be seen again. With no reliable records or investigations, their fates remain a mystery, feeding the dark reputation of these places. These crimes came in many forms. In big towns, women lured men into upstairs rooms where drugs or blades waited. On the plains, fights broke out that ended in alleys with knives in the dark. Even saloons that weren't openly corrupt carried a risk. One wrong glance, one lost hand of Pharaoh, and you could find yourself dragged into the back before anyone noticed. Not every saloon operated this way, but enough did that every swing of the doors was a gamble. You might find a cold beer and a good story, or you might never be seen again. Behind the glow of oil lamps and the lure of card tables, saloons thrived on exploitation and danger. And if disappearances and death weren't enough, saloons reached for something even greater: control of the law itself, where justice was rigged, bought, and sold over whiskey-stained tables. The saloon conspiracy, where power was bought and justice sold. Step into a frontier saloon, and you weren't just ordering whiskey, you were walking into the nerve center of corruption. Behind the noise of pianos and clinking glasses, power was bought, sold, and traded like chips at the card tables. Sheriffs, politicians, and outlaws all met here, cutting deals that decided who held office, who escaped punishment, and who never left the room alive. Saloons became the true courts of the West, places where votes were rigged, laws bent, and entire towns placed under the grip of those with the deepest pockets. Elections were staged not in polling stations, but in smoke-filled backrooms, where bribes, threats, and ballot stuffing determined the winners before a single vote was cast. These halls of vice weren't just about liquor and gambling. They were command centers for organized fraud. Ballot boxes vanished, gangs intimidated voters, and officials turned a blind eye in exchange for envelopes stuffed with cash. Utility companies, local bosses, and saloon kings all pulled the strings, ensuring no decision went against their interests. What looked like harmless gathering spots were, in truth, engines of corruption. The laughter, smoke, and whiskey masked a darker truth. The Wild West was often ruled not from courthouses or capitals, but from behind saloon doors where justice itself was up for sale. Which truth about the Wild West shocked you the most? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. And if you want more untold truths of the frontier, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next story. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.